Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The American occupation forces announced they've launched a wide-scale military operation near Samarra, the largest since invading the country 3 years ago. In an official report, the U.S. military said that an air-land offensive had begun south of Salah ad-Din province with 50 aircrafts, 200 armored vehicles, and 1,500 American troops. The goal is to root out armed insurgents who are suspected of hiding in an area northeast of Samarra. According to occupation forces, initial reports indicate that a number of weapon caches have been uncovered containing artillery shells, explosives, bomb-making materials, and military uniforms. The National Kurdish Alliance forces in Iraq killed a 10-year-old boy and wounded 6 civilians when they opened fire at protesters in Halabja, north of Iraq. The people of Halabja took to the streets to commemorate the day ousted President Saddam Hussein attacked the city using biological weapons. They also demanded an improvement for their living conditions.
The anniversary of Halabja was celebrated in a different way this year. It started with a large demonstration at the town's entrance, where protesters created a human barrier to prevent any visitors from entering. The people are protesting the lack of social services and the deterioration of their living conditions.
We gathered here to demand from the local government an improvement in our conditions and in the town's infrastructure and to solve the problems that we continue to struggle with on a day-to-day basis.
The protesters are demanding compensation from the government for victims of the chemical attack. They also want a specific budget set aside to rebuild the town, which they feel deserves better than its current state.
We are very unhappy with the situation right now. There is no development, no construction, no public services, and no jobs for the unemployed.
The riots turned violent when a group of men stormed a memorial site dedicated to the victims of the Halabja attack. The protesters set the memorial site on fire, killing 1 civilian and wounding several others. This year, the local residents took the anniversary of the tragic events as an opportunity to demand an improvement in their living conditions, which have been deteriorating for a number of years. Youssef Hassan, Al-Alam TV, Halabja.
Several public figures and diplomatic personalities called on the U.S. and British governments to establish an international tribunal to investigate war crimes committed by the occupation forces in their war on Iraq. Some requested comment from British Prime Minister Tony Blair and U.S. President George Bush on the violations happening in Iraq.
Former ministers, parliament members, and prominent public figures gathered in front of the building of the British Parliament to read 28 allegations of war crimes committed in Iraq by the British occupation forces. They also demanded that London and Washington stand before an international court for war crimes.
The action today is in order to...
Our action today is to try to reinforce international law and to question Bush and Blair about the war crimes they have committed against humanity.
They have committed against humanity.
The movement to demand an international investigation started last December when former MP Tony Benn submitted a petition stating that many international agreements were violated when Iraq was invaded and occupied. He sent the petition to the Prime Minister Tony Blair and UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. The petition was signed by more than 1,000 prominent British public figures. Annan responded to the petition saying that these violations are troublesome. The British Prime Minister, however, had no response.
We all know the war was a mistake. We all know the war was a mistake. It's the biggest mistake made by a British Prime Minister in the last 50 years. I used to be a member of the House of Commons, and I should know how they are.
Many of the allegations directed by this movement at the British and American governments fall under the category of war crimes against humanity. Some of the most important are threatening national security by waging an illegal war, the deliberate targeting of millions of civilians, especially their health organizations and infrastructure, stealing and appropriating the resources of an occupied country, political and religious repression of Iraqis, physical torture and sexual abuse of prisoners, and the use of internationally prohibited weapons against civilian targets. The British government denies all of these allegations. However, the Guardian newspaper uncovered confidential memos sent by John Sawyer, the British delegate in Iraq, to the British Prime Minister shortly after the invasion. In them, he warned that a disaster was on the verge of occurring in Iraq because of the occupation forces' actions. Those who opposed the war considered this as governmental testimony to the violations committed in Iraq. All the independent political sides in Britain unanimously agree that the invasion of Iraq and what is happening there are now blatant violations of international laws. Only one political entity disagrees, the British government. Abdel Karim Al-Haj, Al-Alam, London.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced today that negotiations between Russia and Iran regarding the Iranian nuclear file will resume very soon. He added that Russia was very disappointed with Iran's stance, which did not help in finding a peaceful solution to the conflict. Iran had earlier refused Moscow's proposal to transfer its uranium enrichment program to Russia.
Amidst an escalation of tension in the Iranian nuclear file, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov expressed his disappointment with Iran's shifting position. Iran has gone from accepting the Russian proposal to work together on a joint uranium enrichment project to Iran's complete refusal of this initiative.
Iran's behavior in the negotiations has disappointed us. It does not help those who are trying to find a peaceful alternative to Iran's nuclear research program. The Russian initiative does not rely on Iran's approval or disapproval. It was suggested after looking at all sides of the conflict to come up with an agreement that will end the standstill and return concerned parties to the negotiation table.
Sergei Lavrov said that the possibility that his country would change its position on Iran's nuclear file if Washington supports Russia's accession to the World Trade Organization is not true. The foreign minister pointed out that Tehran turned to Russia with another request for more talks, which according to him will take place as soon as possible. Some political analysts maintain that Iran's handling of its nuclear file is playing in the hands of those calling for imposing sanctions on it.
The problem is that the Russian initiative is conditional upon the proposed project to continue Iran's uranium enrichment in Russia, which means that Iran will have to suspend all its nuclear research activities. This is why Iran refuses this initiative, but unfortunately this only helps the position of those who do not wish to solve this problem peacefully.
In another development, the death of former Yugoslavian President Slobodan Milosevic has raised a lot of questions in Moscow. Sergei Lavrov maintained that Russian doctors would like to either take part in the post-mortem examination or to look at the results of the autopsy report.
We turned to the International Court of Justice to allow our doctors to be part of the medical examination team, or at least to see the autopsy results. Our team of doctors was prepared to head to The Hague as early as possible.
It's worth noting that Milosevic had turned to The Hague to allow him to go to Russia for medical treatment. Russia had guaranteed that it would return Milosevic to The Hague once his treatment was completed. However, the court denied their request. As a team of Russian doctors prepares to go to The Hague to look at the autopsy report, the Russian public argues about the possibility of burying the former Yugoslavian president in Moscow. While this may be a sensible move from a humanitarian point of view, as Milosevic's closest allies live in Moscow, the Russian leadership is expected to be more concerned with the political implications of this move, taking into account the West's possible reaction.
White House spokesman Scott McClellan said that talks between the U.S. and Iran about Iraq will be very limited and will not affect Iran's nuclear file or the other dispute between the two countries. Iran accepted the Iraqi and American proposal to talk directly with Washington about Iraq. Iran, however, confirmed that it will never stop its nuclear program. These new developments come as official negotiations on Iran's nuclear file are scheduled to start tomorrow, Friday, in the Security Council. Due to differences between the 5 UN Security Council members on whether to continue diplomatic negotiations or impose sanctions on Iraq, no resolutions will be released before next week. Iran opened the door for negotiations with the U.S., which comes as a surprise amid intensive American attempts to isolate Tehran internationally because of its nuclear program. The Iranian parliament, which insists on Tehran's right to acquire civilian nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, discussed in a closed session recent developments concerning the nuclear program, including possible economic and political repercussions. This could happen if the UN Security Council decides to impose sanctions on Iran, which may explain why Tehran decided to send a message to the U.S. focusing on the security of Iraq.
We accept the proposal of Mr. Hakim and the Iraqi president for the sake of helping to establish security in Iraq and an independent government.
Iran responded positively to calls of Abdulaziz al-Hakim, the head of the High Council for the Islamic Revolution, to open a dialogue with Washington to reach an understanding on differences concerning Iraq. This development came after Washington had authorized its ambassador to Iraq, Zalmay Khalilzad, to talk with Iran. Iran will have to negotiate with the U.S. over Iraq, but this might be used as a bargaining ticket to change U.S. position on its nuclear program, despite American confirmation that this will not happen.
The UN has a different position than ours, but I would like to confirm that Iran will never stop its nuclear program.
This new Iranian position came at a time when Washington expressed that Iran is the biggest challenge to its foreign policy. Iran was categorized as an axis of evil, and the U.S. renewed threats to use its leverage in the National Security Strategic Report if Iran should not change its policies.
Iran is a challenge because it is trying to acquire a nuclear program that would enable it to produce nuclear weapons. We believe it is doing so within the framework of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran lied about its nuclear activities, which is in violation of its commitments. Of course, Iran is also the central banker of terrorism. We have much reason to be worried. By the way, Iran's regime was not elected. It oppresses its people. It is a problematic country.
The 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council held their 5th session to talk about Iran's nuclear crisis since the International Atomic Energy Agency referred Iran's nuclear file to the Security Council. Some observers believe that there will be more negotiations because while Washington insists on sanctions on Iran, others prefer a diplomatic solution.
Whether we give more time, I think the discussions will be about giving more time to diplomacy and whether the UN Security Council and the International Atomic Energy Agency are responsible for taking care of this matter or not. We are still working on the negotiations, and we will know later this week.
U.S. ally Britain believes that negotiations with Iran about its nuclear file will be the most difficult diplomatic test. Iran, on the other hand, believes that the negotiations are a test for the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Palestinian refugees in Lebanon have expressed disappointment regarding new resolutions adopted by the Lebanese National Dialogue Conference that was held in Beirut. Mr. Anwar Raja, the spokesman for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the General Command, has confirmed that Palestinian refugees refuse to be a gambling card on the bargaining table. Mr. Raja added that Palestinians will not give up their arms until they are given their civil and human rights. The Lebanese National Dialogue Conference has adopted a number of resolutions regarding the disarmament of Palestinian groups. Palestinian factions outside the refugee camps must lay down their weapons within 6 months. Moreover, armed groups in refugee camps will be subject to scrutiny and will be under Lebanese supervision. The Lebanese Authority will take charge for protecting Palestinian refugee camps. The spokesman for the PFLP General Command in Lebanon has denounced these resolutions. He confirmed that Palestinian refugees should not be a gambling card on the bargaining table. He called on the Lebanese government to grant civil and human rights to the Palestinians before discussing the issue of disarmament.
Lebanese officials gave orders to Palestinians to lay down their weapons. They used threatening and commanding language. By doing so, they tried to ignore the problems of Palestinian refugees. We do not want this file to be closed that way. We are very sure that the objective is to target the spirit of the resistance in the entire Arab world. Lebanese officials decided to reopen the files of armed Palestinians who they claim are a risk factor. Their decision to disarm Palestinians has escalated the political situation.
The outcome of the Lebanese Dialogue Conference regarding the disarmament of Palestinians did not provide guarantees or reassurances to Palestinian refugees. Many refugees believe that the Lebanese government is incapable of protecting them.
Palestinians do not mind giving up their weapons if there is someone who will protect Palestinian refugee camps. We cannot forget the massacres of Samarra and Shatila. Even if we just had sticks back then, no one would have dared to enter the Samarra and Shatila refugee camps and commit such heinous crimes.
Palestinians question commitment and sincerity of Lebanese officials who have promised to improve living conditions in refugee camps. Resolutions adopted by Lebanese officials in the National Dialogue Conference have not met the satisfaction of many Palestinian refugees. Palestinians stirred doubt about such resolutions, especially the ones that deal with refugees' civil and human rights. However, it is a step in the right direction. It remains to be seen what other steps may follow. For Madar Program, Carolyn Biani, Abu Dhabi TV, Beirut.
Strict security measures have been taken today on all Beirut entrances, which have caused severe traffic jams, notably on the Beirut-Juni highway and in the vicinity of the American Embassy in Aukar, where a demonstration against the Israeli attack on the Jericho prison is due to take place. Yesterday, Palestinian refugees in the Ain al-Hilwa Palestinian refugee camp protested against the attack on the Jericho prison, and Lebanon denounced the attack, accusing Israel of inciting aggression. More with May Fawaz.
More than 1,000 Palestinians took to the streets on Wednesday at the Ain al-Hilwa Palestinian refugee camp in Sidon, protesting against Israel's raid on Tuesday on a Palestinian prison in Jericho and the capture of Palestinian prisoners, including Ahmad Sadat, leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In the camp, they shouted slogans against Israel and the U.S. and burnt flags of the U.S. and Britain, accusing them of causing the arrest of Sadat by withdrawing their monitors from the jail shortly before the Israeli raid. Lebanon, for its part, denounced the operation, with Prime Minister Fouad al-Samoura calling on the international community to stop the Jewish state's aggressive acts. Samoura said by attacking the Jericho prison and by removing Sadat, Israel proved that it disrespected all conventions and international customs. In a press statement, Samoura said such an act in the present circumstances risked of worsening the situation and called on the international community to aid and support the Palestinian people. He also expressed the solidarity of the Lebanese government with the Palestinian people in their legitimate struggle for their political rights and sovereignty. In a phone call with UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, Samarra said the retreat of international monitors before the attack on the Jericho prison took place was questionable.
Tensions remained high in the occupied Palestinian territories following Israel's raid on a prison in Jericho, where troops seized a Palestinian leader of an armed group. Palestinian gunmen killed an Israeli soldier taking part in a West Bank operation in which 5 alleged wanted men were detained. Israel elsewhere in the occupied territories, gunmen shot and wounded 2 Israeli motorists near a Jewish settlement. Also in the West Bank, Israeli border guards shot a Palestinian. 4 young stone throwers were also wounded in the incident. The latest developments in this report. Israel's governing Kadima party saw a bounce in its support level in 3 opinion polls today ahead of a March 28th general election after the controversial storming of a West Bank prison. According to a survey published by the Yediot Ahronot, acting Prime Minister Ehud Olmert's centrist party is on course to win. Various similar surveys mark a reverse in fortunes for Kadima, whose support levels have been slowly eroding in polls over the last 5 weeks. They were conducted in the aftermath of Tuesday's raid on a prison in Jericho, during which 6 Palestinian armed activists were captured, including Ahmad Sadat, the alleged masterminder of the 2001 assassination of an Israeli cabinet minister. Across the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Palestinians went on strike over the Israeli military operation, as they charged that Olmert ordered the operation as an election tactic, although the government insists it had no option but act after foreign monitors were withdrawn from the prison. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas condemned Israel's raid as a crime that would not be forgiven and accused British and US monitors supervising the prison of complicity with Israel.
IDF Staff Sergeant Ido Shapira, age 20, from Haifa, was killed in a shootout with wanted terrorists in Jenin today. He will be laid to rest in half an hour from now at the Haifa Military Cemetery. IBA's Eli Walga-Lernter has more on the incident and other violence today in the territories.
Staff Sergeant Ido Shapira was shot dead in a gun battle in Jenin this morning during an IDF operation intended to flush out wanted terror suspects. Shapira's unit had surrounded a home believed to be used as a hideout by wanted Islamic Jihad and Tanzim terror suspects in an effort to force them to surrender. 5 gunmen inside the home fired at troops and hit Shapira in his upper body in an area unprotected by his bulletproof vest. A helicopter was dispatched to evacuate him to the hospital, but Shapira died from his wounds even before the chopper arrived. 4 of the wanted Palestinian suspects who were barricaded inside turned themselves in following the IDF siege. One of those arrested is the gunman who shot and killed Shapira. Troops searching the house recovered 3 rifles, 2 handguns, and 2 hand grenades. A 5th gunman attempted to escape during the operation was also apprehended. IDF soldiers have been operating in Jenin and nearby villages since Sunday in an effort to detain members of Islamic Jihad and Tanzim members said to be preparing attacks on Israeli targets in the coming days. Elsewhere in the territories, 2 Israelis sustained light to moderate wounds when Palestinian gunmen opened fire on their car near the Hawara roadblock near the settlement of Tapuach in the West Bank. 2 Israelis, security guards from Ariel and Petah Tikva, were treated at Beilinson Hospital in Petah Tikva. Earlier this morning, the IDF launched airstrikes targeting access roads in the Gaza Strip after a barrage of Qassam rockets hit open areas in the western Negev. No injuries or damages were reported. And IDF troops detained 15 wanted Palestinian terror suspects overnight, including members of Hamas, Tanzim, and Fatah. Meanwhile, security forces have received 50 terror warnings, including 13 specific ones, and are on high alert for Palestinian retaliation for the IDF raid on the Jericho prison on Tuesday. Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz has extended a complete closure on the territories, at least until Saturday night. For IBA News, this is Eli Walgalanter.
Following the final round of coalition talks today, Hamas is expected to complete the composition of the new PA government by tomorrow. The group will present their new cabinet to Palestinian Chairman Mahmoud Abbas on Monday. It appears increasingly unlikely that Abbas's Fatah party will join the Hamas-led coalition. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, in her first comment on this week's IDF action at the Jericho prison, said that Washington told the PA a year ago that they are concerned for the welfare of the American jailers at the site, but the Palestinians didn't do a thing about it. Once the situation became intolerably dangerous, the Americans were ordered by Washington to vacate the prison. Acting Prime Minister Ehud Olmert also responded publicly for the first time to Tuesday's raid on the Jericho prison. This is what he had to say.
All the responsibility for the decision made by the U.S. and the British government to pull out the inspectors from jail and thus to make the Israeli operation inevitable lies on the shoulders of the Palestinian Authority, which didn't make the elementary efforts in order to impose its control over the jail and to provide security to the foreign inspectors that were to inspect that the agreement signed between the Palestinian Authority and Israel and the other governments.
Iranians, who have proven to be resilient and capable of beating the odds, are gearing up for the new year. Hamid Rida Asfi, the spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry, has confirmed that the United States is doing everything in its power to derail any political solution to the standoff in the Iranian nuclear crisis. Contrary to Washington's belief, the U.S.-led campaign against Iran has backfired and produced some positive results in favor of Tehran.
Tehran, which is known for its crowded streets, is bidding farewell to the past year and welcoming the new one, which is just around the corner. It hopes that it will emerge from its nuclear crisis victorious and be allowed to resume its civilian uranium enrichment program for atomic energy purposes. In a press conference, the spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry has confirmed that a political solution to the standoff is still possible. Tehran has cooperated fully with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and its Western counterparts. Mr. Asfi accused the United States of hampering efforts aimed at finding a political solution to the Iranian nuclear crisis.
The United States' policy towards Iran's nuclear file is appalling. We have reached a high level of nuclear power despite United States sanctions. We now possess significant qualities of technical know-how in all areas.
It seems that the escalation in the Iranian nuclear crisis and the Western threats of economic sanction on Tehran have not discouraged Iranians from celebrating the new year. Iranian shops and markets are crowded with shoppers, and merchants are busy with displaying and promoting their merchandise. Both shoppers and merchants have agreed that Western threats and international isolation imposed on Tehran have not affected businesses and retail sales. This is not the first time that the Iranian people experience international isolation.
We have seen a large assortment in merchandise this holiday season. I do not think that the threats of economic sanction against Tehran have affected holiday shopping, which is stronger than last year.
Our business during this new year is better than last year, and we do not have any problem. The Iranian people are resilient, and the past few years have proven that.
The Iranian people may put the burden of their nuclear issue aside so they can celebrate the new year, hoping that it will be a good one. However, this nuclear file will haunt them again because it will be put back on the bargaining table. Despite Western and foreign pressure on Tehran, the Iranian people will continue to go on with their lives. They will also continue to fight for their legitimate right to possess a civilian nuclear facility that will provide them with atomic energy. Moreover, they are getting ready to celebrate the Iranian New Year, which is expected to be a busy one and full of incidents and new developments.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin. This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. For a transcript of this program, to watch streaming video, or for instructions on how to receive Link TV in the United States, visit linktv.org.